Hi there, and welcome to my little corner of the internet. My name is Rachel, and this is another true crime case brought to you by yours truly. So today's case does involve a woman who was missing for more than 30 years. And because this involves a missing person, I do feel obligated to just mention the biggest ongoing missing persons now turned homicide case that's happening in the news cycle as we speak. And that, of course, is 22-year-old Gabby Petito. I'm sure that everyone has heard about this. This is one of the biggest cases with the most media attention that I've seen since probably Chris Watts. It's on par with like Jean Benet. So if you'll bear with me just a second before we get started, I would just like to mention that I will not be doing a video about Gabby. I don't feel like I really have anything new or relevant that I can bring to that discussion. Ongoing developing cases really aren't what I do on this channel, and so I will not be making a video about that. My heart does go out to her family, of course, and I do hope that her memory is a blessing to them. If you're here with me, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that there are thousands and thousands of missing women who haven't garnered the same media attention that Gabby Petito has, and yet are just as deserving. So in light of that, I'm going to be leaving some links in the description, and those will take you to organizations that are working towards missing persons cases, specifically missing women from more marginalized communities that are often not getting this kind of national attention and desperately need our help. So if you are interested in learning more information about that, those links again will be in the description. Now, let's get on with the case of the lady in the barrel. Roll the disclaimer. In 1999, Jericho, New York resident Ronald Cohen made a horrifying discovery in the basement of the house he had been living in for the last decade. He had just sold the home for nearly $500,000. And that's 1999 money, so we can assume it was a pretty decent house. The man who had just bought the house wanted to do a final walkthrough before he took the keys. Pretty standard, pretty typical. And he wanted to do a thorough top to bottom walkthrough. That included the crawl space. Now, the entrance to the crawl space only gave about 36 inches of clearance, which is a pretty tight squeeze for two fully grown men, but they wiggled their way in there. As they were exploring this crawl space, the new owner noticed, sort of wedged up under where the stairs would be coming down, a 55-gallon steel drum tipped over on its side. He, of course, turned to Mr. Cohen and asked, "Hey, what's up with the big barrel under your stairs?" It was an otherwise empty crawl space. And Ronald Cohen replied that he really didn't know what it was. It had been there when he moved in 10 years before, and it was too heavy to lift, so he just really never messed with it. But the new owner was not feeling so apathetic towards the mysterious container, and he didn't want to go forward with the sale until it was removed. And I'm telling you right now, I feel this energy because there is a 0.00% chance that I would be moving into a home with some mysterious barrel of unknown origin in the crawl space. That just would not happen. I would need it gone or to discover what is inside of it first. But I am a naturally curious and suspicious person, and apparently this new owner was as well, at least more so than Mr. Cohen. So of course, Ronald Cohen enlists the help of like his real estate agent, a couple of other people, it's not made clear exactly who, to go and roll this barrel out from under the house, because he sure was not about to let a little manual labor come in between him and his $500,000. They do manage to get it out without any problems, and they just set it on the curb for trash pickup. Predictably, the regular trash collectors were like, Ron, we're not taking your surprise barrel full of God knows what in the regular trash. They actually left him a note saying it was, one, too heavy, and two, they didn't know what was inside of it. The thing literally weighed 350 pounds. pounds. And also there are rules about what you are allowed to dispose of, and they don't know what's in there, right? It could be battery acid, and whatever is in there, dangerous or not, it's probably not good. I mean, nobody seals up a 55-gallon barrel and hides it in a dank crawl space because it's full of hope. Okay, I think we can assume that it's not 350 pounds of inner peace. So Ronald decides, you know what? I'm just going to open this thing up myself. Maybe whatever is in it is just something I can dump out myself and take care of this issue. And what he finds inside of this barrel is about the worst case scenario in this situation. The barrel is, first of all, full of teeny little plastic pellets, and peeking out from the middle of these little pellets is a woman's shoe and what appears to be a human hand, a mummified human hand. Obviously, they call the police right away. The police remove this 55-gallon drum, which is now evidence, and take it to a forensic lab to be examined. At the lab, they carefully remove all of the contents, which includes the little plastic pellets that I mentioned, like zillions of them, a woman's purse, a single stem of like a plastic flower, some kind of greenish, yellowish, brownish goo, and most notably, the whole mummified body of a woman who is curled up in the fetal position. Of course, this body is whisked away for a full autopsy immediately because now that the body is no longer protected in this sealed barrel, the medical examiners know that the skin and other organic material is going to start to decompose very quickly, and they need to get as much evidence off of this body as they possibly can. At the autopsy, they note that she's a fairly small woman, petite. She's like 4'9", and also she has some really unusual dental work done on her front teeth. She's got like some gold dental work that they determined was indicative that she was probably not from the United States and probably from South America. She has long black hair, and also very sadly, at the time of her death, she was pregnant and nearly full term with a baby boy, whose remains were also preserved inside her. They take some tissue samples from the fetal remains in the hopes that maybe sometime down the road, they'll be able to find a father using DNA. And as they continue the autopsy, the cause of death becomes very apparent: blunt force trauma. This young woman had 10 lacerations to her head, especially the back and the top of the head. They could even still see some blood staining around the outside, so they knew that at the time that those lacerations were made, she had been alive. In some places, her skull was even broken into small pieces, so these were very, very severe wounds. This was definitely the result of a vicious, deliberate attack intended to cause her death. Of course, the investigators begin looking at everything that was found on her person in the barrel so that they can try to determine exactly who this woman was and hopefully who it was that killed her. One of the things that they noticed right away is that her clothes did not seem modern. The style of her clothing and the material seemed like they were more from the 60s. They think they're potentially looking at a crime that happened more than 30 years ago. As they're looking in the purse, they do find like a date book, which some of us oldies might remember. Before you had cell phones, you had a date book where you had to write down people's names and phone numbers and addresses because you didn't have a little computer in your pocket to just keep all your information for you. So you had to like write it out by hand, and lots of people had a little book or whatever that they would just carry around with them in case they needed to make a phone call on a landline. So that's what she had, but unfortunately, it had been soaked along with the purse in this goo that was in the barrel, and the pages were totally stuck together. I believe one of the forensic investigators said that they were pulpy. You know how when paper gets soaked, it kind of turns to mush? That's what they were dealing with in this situation, but just in the hopes that there might be something that they could salvage They put it in a forensic drying cabinet, which is basically just what it sounds like, usually a glass-fronted cabinet that sort of circulates air, and forensic technicians use this when they have evidence materials that are wet. Of course, it's going to take some time before this date book dries out, and they're just hoping against hope that they may get some kind of relevant info off of it once it is, but they know how slim the chances are that this ruined paper is going to reconstitute to the point that it's of any use to them. While the forensics lab is doing what they can do, other investigators are tracking down every previous owner of that home to see if anybody knows anything about the barrel. And every person they talk to has basically the same story. The barrel was there when I moved in. It's really heavy, so I didn't bother with it until they get to the original inhabitant of that house, the person who had actually built the extension onto the house that the crawl space was under. And that man was Howard Elkins, who was now 71 years old. He had originally sold the house in 1972, and after closing his plastics business in New York, he retired and moved to Boca Raton, Florida. So the name of the plastics company co-owned by Elkins was Melrose Plastics, and they made fake plants, fake shrubbery and trees and flowers out of plastic. The barrel had labels on it indicating where the raw materials that had originally been in there were manufactured, and when they tracked down that manufacturer, they were able to determine that that barrel had gone to Melrose Plastics. Now you may remember just a couple of minutes ago, I mentioned that the barrel was full of plastic pellets and that there was also a plastic flower stem inside. So for investigators, these puzzle pieces are starting to fit together, but they're not quite there yet. They need a little bit more. They track down the man who was Elkins' business partner at the time, the other co-owner of Melrose Plastics. He's also living in Boca Raton, Florida, and retired at this time. I guess Boca Raton is just a really hot spot for wealthy New Yorkers to spend their retirement, but he's there too. And they ask him about the barrel and if he knows anything about these barrels being used at his business. He does confirm that they received things in the barrels, and from my understanding, it wasn't 100% clear, but from my understanding, it was the special green dye that they used to color the bases of the plants, like the stems of the plants. This dye was called halogen green, and that is what that greenish goo that was in the barrel, that's what that was this halogen green dye. And the thing about this dye that was most interesting from an investigative perspective is that this dye was not manufactured after 1971. It was pretty much strictly used in the 60s. So at this point, you might be thinking, well, A leads to B, and B leads to C, and C leads to go arrest Howard Elkins. He's clearly a suspect in this situation. The problem is that he's now living in Florida, and they are in New York, and Florida is out of their jurisdiction, which basically just means that it's going to be a little bit more complicated to get him back to New York in order to charge him and put him on trial. So they really need to build a good, solid case first. So before they just go and arrest Howard, they continue to work on building this case, and ideally, they would really like to have an identity for this woman. Because if they can identify her, they might be able to piece together some kind of motive, and that would really help them in their case. And let me tell you, they literally got so damn lucky. The pages of that date book actually dried out to the point that they were able to separate the pages. The ink was completely dissolved away, of course, but the lab had this fantastic machine called a video spectral comparator, which is basically just a fancy piece of equipment that uses different wavelengths and angles of light. in order to be able to see what was written on a page, even if there's nothing on there that you can see with your naked eye. As they're looking through the pages with this comparator machine, they do find this series of numbers, which they determine is a resident alien number. This is the number that they give you when you immigrate into the country. It's like what would be on a green card. It would allow you to work. It basically means that you're legally here in the country as an immigrant. And this is great, right? This is very valuable information because the resident alien number is definitely going to lead them to a name. So of course they contact immigration. But this number is 30 years old. From 1960 something to 1999, they've changed their system and the way that they do things. So they have to actually look for the immigration files that will attach a name to this number, and that's going to take them a little bit of time. While they're waiting for that immigration information to come back, they decide they're going to head on down to sunny Boca Raton to talk to Howard Elkins. Now, they're not going to arrest him. They're not prepared to handcuff him or anything. They just want to talk to him a little bit, see if he's willing to elaborate on any of this. Expectedly, Howard just denies everything. He says that his company never used any barrels like that. They wouldn't have any need for a chemical like that. He says that he never put anything down in his crawl space and he doesn't know what they're talking about. There was one thing that he did admit to, though. When they had talked to his business partner had mentioned that he had hung out quite a bit with a woman he described as being Hispanic, and told them that he believed that Elkins was having an affair with this woman. So the investigators, when they go to see Elkins, do ask him about this. Did you ever have an affair? And he does admit that he had an affair, but that the woman wasn't from this country, and one day she just left and went back home. When they asked if he could describe her, he suddenly couldn't remember anything. He didn't know what she looked like. He didn't know how tall she was or if she had long or short hair. This woman who he had cheated on his wife with, he claims that he barely knows her. He doesn't even remember her name. Now, I don't believe that for a second. I think he absolutely did remember those things, and he just didn't want to admit that he remembered those things. But man, I've heard some narcissistic stuff in my life, but that is beyond the pale, in my opinion. So they're kind of trying to push him a little bit, and they ask him if he knew that she was pregnant. And this stops him for a second, and then the phone rings. He picks up the phone, and he says it's his wife, and he tells the investigators that they need to get out of his house right now. And that's it. He's not going to answer any more questions about this situation. When he tries to shuffle them out the door, tells them they're not welcome in his home anymore and they have to leave, the investigator turns to him and says, "All right, fine, but we're coming back here with an arrest warrant, and I'm going to put you in jail for the rest of your life." And this must have shaken Howard Elkins quite a bit, because after the investigators left, he went to the store and he bought a shotgun. He was found the next day at his neighbor's house in their garage in the back seat of their SUV with a shotgun in between his legs. He was deceased from a self-inflicted shotgun wound. So unfortunately, Howard Elkins would never be brought into the justice system. He would never be convicted of this crime by a jury of his peers. But I think that the actions that he took speak very loudly to his guilt. And of course, the investigators in this case also believed that. They took a DNA sample from Howard and compared it to the DNA sample taken from the fetal remains found inside the lady in the barrel. And it was a match, a strong match, 99.93%. He was the father of that baby. The question that I have is, did he know that this woman was pregnant when he killed her? I think that he likely did, because the fetal remains were 17 inches long. That is nearly a full-term baby. She certainly would have been showing. I don't think he killed himself out of any kind of guilt for having inadvertently killed a child that was his. I think he did it because he didn't want to go to jail. He knew the jig was up. A few days after the investigators got back from Boca Raton, immigration finally got back with them with a name. She was 27-year-old Reina Angelica Marroquin. She was from El Salvador. So now that they had a name, they still wanted to find out a little bit more about this woman because they'd really like to return her remains to any family or loved ones that she may have left. They'd like to know a little bit more about her story. Unfortunately, they didn't have any of that information, so they went back to the date book. It was, to say the least, a long shot. All of the numbers in that book were at least 30 years old, and they knew that the likelihood that they would find somebody who would actually answer and be the person that they're looking for was very, very slim. But they had to try anyway. And again, they got extremely lucky. Of the 5 or so names and numbers they were able to recover, somebody actually picked up. This woman's name was Kathy Adrada, and all of this time, she had lived in the same apartment and had the same phone number. I need to make sure that people understand how really incredible that is, because back in the day, like before my time even, when you moved, you changed your phone number. Like you didn't get to take your phone number with you. The phone number went with the place that you lived. So in order to keep that phone number, she had to have lived in the same place. And most people who live in like apartments in New York don't live in the same place for 30 years. But Kathy did, and it's so good that she did because she was able to help investigators figure out more about who Reina was and the circumstances that led to her murder. They told Kathy, of course, how they came across her phone number, and they asked her to identify Reina based on her immigration photo. I'm assuming they were just trying to check and make sure that this person actually knew Reina and wasn't just some like crazy lady looking for attention. You think that that sounds a little nutty. It's not. People do all kinds of crazy things just to try to get in the news or whatever. So they did show her Reina's immigration photo, and she correctly identifies her as her friend, Reina Marroquin. Kathy had been teaching a class for people learning English as a second language, and Reina was attending that class while she was going to fashion school. At that time, Reina had just recently immigrated into the United States from El Salvador after she caught her husband cheating on her. Basically, her husband got another woman pregnant, and she found out about it, and she decided, forget this, and she left and decided, like so many millions of other people throughout time, that she was going to go to New York for a fresh start. Reina eventually found a job at the Melrose Plastics Company, and she confessed to Kathy that she was seeing a man from work, but that he was married and already had 3 children. But she also said that he was planning on leaving his wife to marry her. Tale as old as time. How many times have we heard that old song and dance? And Reina's eyes also started to become unclouded from this fantasy she had about the married man leaving his wife when she fell pregnant with his child, which she did tell Kathy about. She thought when she told him that she was pregnant, that would be the catalyst he needed to finally leave and then marry her. But instead, he just put her up in an apartment and continued keeping her as the other woman. At this point, Reina expressed a lot of doubt to her friend that he was ever going to divorce his wife. Pro tip, they never divorce their wives, okay? Find yourself a man that's not attached. So one night, Reina calls Kathy, and she's frantic and in tears. And she's telling Kathy that she's really messed up this time. She had actually, in a fit of rage over being left pregnant in an apartment and husbandless, she had called her boyfriend's house and talked to his wife and told her everything. Her boyfriend was so angry, he had threatened to kill her and Raina was really scared and told Kathy, I think he's going to kill me. I made a really bad decision and he's really gonna kill me. Raina never told Kathy the identity of this married boyfriend. She had no idea that this man was Raina's boss at the plastics company, Howard Elkins. Shortly after Raina had called Kathy so frantically and so scared, Kathy went over to pay her friend a visit just to check on her and see if she was okay, and she found the apartment completely empty. She continued to call Raina every day, but never got an answer. Never heard from her friend again. And when she tried to report her to the police as missing, the police completely dismissed her. They said, oh, she's probably just out shopping and she'll be back. Or, oh, well, maybe she went back home to El Salvador and didn't tell anybody. And also told her, besides, if you're not family, you can't report her missing. Well, this would have been a huge problem because Raina didn't have any family in the United States. All of her family was back in El Salvador. Kathy had no way of knowing how to get a hold of them there. And so eventually she just resigned to the fact that she was never going to see her friend again and no one was ever going to investigate her disappearance. And that, as they say, is that. Until 30 years later, when Ronald Cohen finally opened that 55-gallon drum. So this is it. This is the full story. The opportunity and the motive. Investigators pieced it together. They think that Howard Elkins lured her to the plastics company under some kind of false pretense, hit her over the head multiple times, killing her, put her in the barrel, filled the barrel with plastic in order to weigh it down, and probably was intending to dump it in the river. But discovering how heavy it was, ended up just taking it back to his house and stuffing it under the crawl space, hoping no one would ever notice. And with Howard already being dead by his own hand, there was nobody to prosecute. So the case was just closed. But fortunately, a journalist named Oscar Corral was able to track down Raina's 95-year-old mother in El Salvador. He was able to speak with her about her daughter, and investigators were able to return her remains to her family for burial, which is so much more than the families of lots of missing people get. Almost 1 month after Raina was returned to El Salvador, her mother passed away and was buried right next to her daughter. Howard Elkins really thought that he could keep his horrible crime a secret, and he almost did. And although he would never see true justice, at least Raina's family got the closure that they had been waiting for 30 years. And that is all I have for you today, friends. Thank you so much for being here with me. I hope that you found that case interesting. It's definitely the most bizarre case that I've ever covered on this channel so far. Take time to take care of yourself today and every day, and I will see you next time. Bye!